Alright, let's go over pre-calc quiz number 7 on sections 2.1, 2.3, November 27, 2017. I did hint to you guys before you left on break. I said hint, hint. We might have a quiz on this when you come back. And obviously some of you guys ate too much turkey, and the turkey ran away with your math mind. Circle the best solution. Question number 1, solve for x. If I set this equal to 0, you'll recognize that you cannot factor this. And so what do you have to use? You have to use the quadratic formula, which you guys need some practice on, right? Always write down the quadratic formula. Here, a is equal to 1, b is -6, c is equal to 15. Remember, when you're doing a substitution, make sure you put those in parentheses. My b value is -6. B is -6, A is 1, C is 15, and A is 1. This will become the opposite of -6, which is +6. -6 squared is -6 times -6, which gives you +36. -4 times 1 times 15 gives you a -60, all over 2. 36 minus 60 is -24. -24, the factors are -1 times 4 times 6. The square root of -1 becomes your I. The square root of 4 is your 2, and inside the radical is still your 6. I factor out a 2 there, the greatest common factor in both the numerator and denominator. And remember, you can always check that this works by just multiplying, right? Class, what's 2 times 3? 6. And what's 2 times I? 2i. And you also have this 2 here. You're going to cancel those 2's and you're left with 3 plus or minus I radical 6. And the only choice that has that is D. Question number 2, multiple choice. Find the horizontal asymptote of the given function. If you took the problem and set it equal to 0, that would be wrong, and it's wrong because if you're doing that, not equal to 0, and x is not equal to 5, what is this?
The vertical.
That's the vertical asymptote. So notice that I should have been mean. I should have put x not equals 5 in there. Maybe I'll do that. But this problem is talking about the horizontal asymptote, which basically says that I need to look at the numerator and denominator and look at its highest degrees there. So x squared over x to the first. When your top is greater than your bottom, numerator greater than denominator, that means you have no horizontal asymptote. Okay, that's why the answer is none. So don't be confused on that part. Question number 3. Tells you it's not multiple choice. Okay, circle the correct answer. Degree of the polynomial. If I look at my polynomial there, I'm starting down, ending up. That's called my end behavior. The end behavior can kind of tell me the degree of the polynomial. Well, I know the easiest one is 1 to the x to the first power. This is odd. Starts down, ends up, and this matches. So this is going to be a odd polynomial. Another way that you can figure that out is looking at the number of turning points. 1, 2, 3, 4. That's switching from decreasing to increasing. Turning points is equal to the number of degrees minus 1. So if I have 4 turning points and you solve for n, you'll get 5, which is also an odd. Our leading coefficient, I should say leading coefficient, again, this starts down, ends up, which means that it will be a positive. It would have been a negative if I switched that around and just put a negative sign in front. For the end behavior, on the left side, as I'm going to the left side, it's going down, and as I go to the right side, it's going to go up. 1 point apiece. Question number 4, factor completely. I have 4 terms here. Now, the temptation would have been to add those. 3x to the 4th minus, or plus 4x squared minus 15. And actually that should have been factorable. If you wanted to do it this way, you could. A times c is negative 45, and your b value is 4. Two numbers that multiply to be 45 but add to be 4. 9 and 5. And that means they're both... Which one is negative?
5.
And then I take these two values, put them in my box. But pay attention here, this is what's different about it. This is 9x squared. You're basically splitting the middle term, and you see that? They've actually already done it for you. You put your first term in there, and then your last term, and then you'll recognize that your GCF going this way is x squared. GCF going this way is 3x squared. GCF this way is negative 5. And your GCF going this way is 3. And you realize that x squared plus 3 and 3x squared minus 5 is the same. Here is your answer is B. Some of you also may have done this by factoring by grouping. You have 4 terms. Basically just cover up the last two and find your GCF here. Your GCF between these two terms is x squared. You look over here, your GCF is also going to be a 3 there. And again, you want in factoring by grouping, you want it to be where you have a common factor. The greatest common factor is 3x squared minus 5, so you take that out, and whatever's left behind, so the x squared and a positive 3 is right there, and that would be your letter choice, B. Alright, so for question number 5, it says which value is not a solution? Well, I have x to the 4th minus 3x squared minus 54. You can solve this problem in quadratic like. How would you do that? Well, just pretend this is x squared minus 3x minus 54. Does that make sense? Take a times c, negative 54. B value is negative 3. Two numbers that multiply to be negative 54. And then two numbers that are going to add. Well, those numbers are 9 and 6. 9 has to be negative because negative 9 plus 6 gives me negative 3. Negative 9 times 6 gives me negative 54. Well, if you've watched my videos, the Xbox method, if your a value is equal to 1, which it is, then I don't need to do the box. You just put those there. Now, what's different about this problem, though, is it's not x minus 9, x plus 6. I need x squared and x squared, because if you did FOIL, that would be x to the 4th, positive 6x, negative 9x squared, and then negative 54. So if I'm keep factoring, I want solutions. Solutions meaning that you have something like x is equal to. It's not the binomials factored. You need to keep going. So x squared minus 9 is the difference of squared. Remember, you can always do x squared plus 0x minus 9. So now I have x plus 3x minus 3. And this one stays the same. Then you're just going to apply the zero product rule. X plus 3 equals 0. And x minus 3 equals 0. And solve. Here are two of my zeros, 3 and negative 3. Come over here. You just subtract 6. Take the square root of both sides. Remember, this is where students are having issues. When you take the square root of a quadratic and an equation, you actually have plus or minus. The reason why is, if you did this problem, there's actually two solutions for x. You can have negative 6 squared, or you can have positive negative 6 squared, and those will both equal negative 6. So it's both plus or minus, which means that we're looking for not solutions. So this is a solution. I put a check mark for a solution. 3 is a solution. Negative I radical 6 is also a solution. This is the only one that's not a solution. That's why it was worth 14 points. Question number 6. Make sure to show all your work and box your answers. Number 6, given the problem below, find an equation in standard form. Probably the number one mistake for students is to think that 4 was the vertex. If this is 4, that means it can't be the highest point. So I recognize that the information they've given me is these points are called X-intercepts. So I have to use intercept or factored form. Y equals a times x minus p, x minus q. My p-value is -2. So the opposite of a -2 is +2. If x is equal to 1, my binomial is x minus 1. And then I'm going to substitute in that other order pair, which is 0, 4. X is 0, y is 4. So there's my y, put in 4. We're solving for your a value. Here your x value is actually repeated twice. 0 plus 2 is 2, 0 minus 1 is -1. Multiply, you get -2 times a. Divided by -2, a is equal to -2. Take your a value, put it back into your equation. Now, this here is factored form, or intercept form. But this problem was looking for standard form. Standard form just means get something really big. So you just expand that using FOIL or your box, and then distribute your -2. This is in standard form. I gave you 2 points if you got to the binomials, x plus 2, x minus 1. I would have given you 3 points if you got to factored form, or at least some partial credit if you got to a value, and then full credit if you expanded it. Question number 7. Graph the polynomials and make sure to label the x-intercepts. Well, once I see this polynomial, it's already in descending order, I can do a couple of things. I want to know if I can factor it. So I notice I have 4 terms, 1, 2, 3, 4. So I'm going to try factoring by grouping. I cover up the first 2, I realize that their GCF is x squared. Cover up the first 2, look at the last 2 terms, I realize that their GCF is a -4. Notice that they both have an x plus 6, so I'm going to factor that out again. When I do that, you'll notice that the x squared and the -4 are not factored. Put that in my binomials, and you can factor x squared minus 4 again to be x plus 2, x minus 2. So here are my binomials, and then once you solve those by using zero product rule, you'll get solutions of -2, zoom out, -2, +2, and -6. Notice that each of those have a multiplicity of 1, and multiplicity of 1 means shoot through. It's going to go through the x-axis. Some other information that you can get is the leading coefficient. This is a +1, or just a positive number. And my highest degree there is 3. 3 is an odd. So it's going to start down, end up. Remember, if it was negative, it was switched. I can also double check by my number of turning points. Turning points is your highest degree -1, so this is 3 minus 1, so I'm going to have a total of 2 turning points. I take these values here, -2, 2, and -6. Notice again with my basic graph, you can also have used linear. Y equals x to the first is also odd. You're starting down, ending up. Remember, I have to shoot through -6 or go through -6. I have to shoot through or go through -2. And I also have to shoot through 2. Because this is in standard form, if you put in x equals 0, then my y-intercept is -24. And so this is my graph. I give you partial credit. If you told me that it was cubic, you got a cubic graph, and it's factored, I gave you 3 points. This is say you didn't label it, maybe I took off a point. If you knew it was just cubic, like you just drew this graph, didn't know where those points were, I gave you 2 points. Or if you at least factored it, I gave you 2 points as well. For question number 8, graph and make sure you label all of the intercepts. Intercepts are both x and y. In the previous problem, number 7, I asked you just for the x-intercepts. For number 8, the first thing I want to do is look for leading coefficient. The leading coefficient just says look at if it's positive or negative. In this case, it's negative. The second thing I want to know is the degree of the polynomial. Instead of actually multiplying all of these out, all you have to do is just take the x. This becomes x squared. And that's x, so x times x squared times x gives you x to the 4th. Now what does the leading coefficient tell us? X to the 4th, sorry, let me explain further. X to the 4th is an even, and another easier even is x squared, which is just a parabola. So you're going to start up, end up. But because it's negative, the leading coefficient is negative, your graph's going to start down and then end down. Start down and also end down. The number of turning points is also another way to help me check my answer. Turning points are when it goes from increasing and then decreasing. So I have 1 turning point, 2 turning points, 3 turning points. Even figuring out the number of turning points can actually help you determine the number of degrees of the polynomial. Because if you have the equation n minus 1 equals your number of turning points, and I have 1, 2, 3 turning points, if you just add 1 here, then your n value, which is the degree of the polynomial, is equal to 4. Does that make sense? I'm going to take all of my x-intercepts. So I have x equals 0 here. Here, this is x minus 3, so you're just going to set that equal to 0. So you're setting each of these equal to 0. Negative x equals 0. X minus 3 equals 0. X plus 1 equals 0. And then there you're going to see that x is equal to 0, x is equal to 3, and x is equal to a negative 1. Then I'm going to focus on its multiplicity. The multiplicity is just its exponent. So over here, this is just x to the 1st power. Here, this one is x to the 2nd power. So that means its multiplicity is 2. And negative 1, there's no exponent, so you can put a 1 there. That means its multiplicity is 1. If your multiplicity is an odd, it's going to shoot through or go through the x-axis. If it is an even, such as 2, it's going to kiss or bounce off. Now I'm going to list these from least to greatest, or also they call it lower bound to upper bound. So the smallest number of the 3 here is negative 1, then 0, then 3. So if this is my starting point, I start here. I'm going to shoot through or go through the x-axis. I'm approaching 0. 0 says to shoot through or go through it. And then when I get to 3, I'm going to kiss or bounce off of the x-axis. You'll also notice in this problem, it asks you to find all of the intercepts. Well, if I've labeled my intercepts, and then to find my y-intercept, I can make x equal to 0. And if you put in 0 there, you'll actually realize that it actually goes through 0, which means the origin. So here, this x-intercept is both also an x-intercept and a y-intercept at 0. To receive credit, if you got all of that, I gave you full credit. I did not grade you on the leading coefficient, but you need to know the type of graph. So I gave you 2 points if you wrote down cubic. That would have been incorrect. If you gave me wrong end behaviors, meaning you knew it's to the 4th power, but you didn't realize that it opened down, I gave you 2 points. If you knew that the parent function was to the 4th power, I gave you 2 points. To get the 3rd point, you did all of this and you graphed it correctly, but you didn't graph with the y-intercept. You didn't prove to me the y-intercept. So I gave you an extra graph there. Do that for your quiz correction. Question number 9. Number 9 says convert the polynomial into vertex form. Graph in vertex form. So this polynomial here is in standard form. I know it's in standard form because there's no parentheses. So you'll notice that I move the 7 out there, and then I'm going to have just x squared minus 4x. Well, here's my b value, and this b value here can help me complete the square. My equation is b over 2 squared. So half of negative 4 is negative 2. Negative 2 is 2 squared is positive 4. So in class we practice having a blue, and we also practice having a pink. These two values will add to equal 0. The next thing I did here was that x squared minus 4x plus 4 is just a factorable polynomial. So you have really x minus 2 and x minus 2, and you have 2 of those, so you can do x minus 2 squared. They call that a perfect trinomial square. And then negative 4 plus 7 gives me 3. Now you have in vertex form. Vertex form has the power of 2 and then a constant. So here my h value is a positive 2, and my k value is 3. So 2, 3 is my vertex. I know that it's graphed up because my a value, there's no negative sign, so it's going to open up. And remember back here at standard form, if you put in x equals 0 to find your y-intercept, you'll get a 7. To get partial credit, that looks like a 3. I gave you 3 points if you were able to complete the square. I gave you 2 points if you knew that your graph was just quadratic. You just drew a parabola, a u, I gave you 2 points. Leading coefficient, some students made the mistake to think that it opens down, but remember it only opens down if your leading coefficient has that negative sign. That question was out of 16 points, so just fold your paper. 14 plus 16 gives you 30 points. I put a subtotal here. If I circled boxing answer or messy, then you lost points, and then your final score is there if you lost any points.